Greetings fellow Kerbals, this is T-Rex and welcome back to Kerbal Space Program. Today we are going to be sending our Kerbals into orbit for the first time, but before we do that we need to unlock a few more bits of tech to get us there. Notably, we need to unlock some radial decouplers, which are found in the stability module of the tech tree, and I would like to also unlock the Terrier liquid fuel engine as well, which makes for a very excellent upper stage engine. Now to do that we're going to need some more science points, and at the moment we don't have any really, so we need to build a new craft. So I'm going to build something that's quite simple. All you need to do is get your normal command pod, and we're going to basically strap a flea solid rocket booster underneath it, and strap some scientific equipment onto it as well, and we're going to gather some science from the nearby biomes. The Kerbal Space Center itself actually has several biomes of itself. Now, if you're not sure what biomes are in this game, basically all of the planets in the game have got like individual areas on them which class as a biome, like a crater or a mountain region or a desert, something like that. And each biome region allows you to collect science data. So, you know, you take a thermometer and your mystery goo and you can use them in different biomes and they'll all generate science from those biomes. So using the different areas of the Kerbal Space Program at the beginning is a really good, quick, easy way of getting some science at very minimal cost. Now I am speeding up the game footage quite a bit here as I don't really want to bore you all to death. However, I will talk about one of the mods that I'm using right now, which is called X Science. It's a very useful mod. It allows you to basically access all of your scientific equipment a lot more easily. Usually, to get the science from the equipment you need to right click on it, and that can be very difficult, especially if you're in flight or if you're doing difficult maneuvers or if you're traveling quickly and you're covering several different biomes at once. So this gets around that problem, and it basically highlights what scientific data you can collect in each biome. Also, if you're time warping, it will stop the time warp so you can collect the data from that area, which is very handy if you're like orbiting a planet and you're passing over several different biomes. It allows you to collect all the science and make sure you don't miss anything. And as we can see here, that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm hopping around. I'm at the moment gathering science from the airfield, the landing strip actually, and it's allowing us to build up a little reserve of science points that we're going to spend on some more technology. Also, we're going to be doing a few contracts as well because we need the money to upgrade the launch pad and the vehicle assembly building as well, so that we can build bigger and heavier rockets. Because with the vehicle assembly building and the launch pad at the start, they do have limits. I believe the part count for the standard vehicle assembly building is only 30 parts for a rocket, and I think the launch pad has a limit of something like 18 tons. Now for tiny rockets like this, that's fine, but you will need to obviously expand that quickly. And after accumulating 45 science points, we're going to hop in and unlock something called the Science Junior Unit, which is found under the Basic Science section of the tech tree. We also get the Experimental Storage Unit as well, but the main thing I'm after is the Science Junior Unit, which allows you to collect a lot more science. It is a one-use item like the Mystery Goo unit, unless you have a scientist that can reset it, but it does yield a good amount of science, even in the Kerbal Space Center biomes, which don't yield a lot of science in the game, but it is a good start for you. Later on it will get a lot more science from biomes for other planets. We're talking, you know, units in the hundreds of science points. And after a few runs with the Science Junior units, we have now got enough science points to unlock some more tech. So we're going to go to General Construction and unlock the Mark 1 crew cabin that we're now going to use for some tourism missions. Basically, the game allows you to do some missions where you ferry tourists to different destinations. It's basically, when you first unlock them, it's suborbital flights, and then it's an orbit around Kerbin, and then it's take them to the Mun, or to Juna, or Jewel, or whatever. And they have pretty decent payouts, even the entry-level ones do, and that's what we're going to use to get some more money so that we can upgrade the vehicle assembly building and that launch pad. So let's get that rocket built now. So we'll start fresh with the Mark 1 command pod. And let's look around for the parts that we need. We're going to need the crew cabin. Heat shield would probably be necessary for this flight, seeing as it is going to be a suborbital flight. I want to make sure that that cabin is protected. It doesn't have the best heat protection on its own, so that'll be necessary. And I'll just slap on a couple of those parachutes, the radial parachutes as well. The standard Mark 1 parachute probably will be able to do the job, but I just want to be extra safe with our precious cargo of touristy Kerbals. We don't want them getting smushed. Wouldn't be good for tourism industry and KSP, not at all. And now we're just going to slap on a whole ton of liquid fuel tanks and a liquid fuel swivel engine. We're not going to worry about the Reliant engine because it doesn't have gimbal vectoring, which we need to steer, and we're going to slap on some solid rocket boosters, and that should be enough. And before we launch, we cannot forget to load our tourists into the ship, which is a mistake I made many a time in my early days in KSP. Launching the rocket, completing the mission, only to realise you haven't completed the mission because you left the tourists in the bloody space centre, didn't you? Right. And away we go with the airing grace of a tranquilized pigeon, shooting into the stars, looking mildly concerned there, Jebediah. Oh no, he's looking fine now. There we go. Moment's hesitation, I say. Mind you, he hasn't really been into space more than twice at this point, so it's probably quite new to him still. And the tourists are looking very excited now. I'm just keeping an eye on the apoapsis. The moment it basically hits something around 80 or 90,000 meters, we're just going to tilt over and go into a gentle coast and re-enter. There's no point getting too high and risking extreme heating during re-entry. Now these missions can be, as I said before, very lucrative. This is the last one I'm doing. I have skipped ahead a bit. I am doing this episode post-audio at the moment because there's a lot of thunderstorms going on. I tried doing this live earlier on and my microphone kept picking up the rumbling. So in between the lightning strikes outside, I'm getting this audio recorded, which is why sometimes my voice sounds a little bit louder than it was before. This entire episode is probably taking me about 4 hours to do because of how frequent the lightning is outside. Bit of a pain living in subtropical Queensland, I'll tell you that much, especially during storm season. But back to the tourist missions, they're a really good source of early income for the game and almost to a point necessary if you want to get onto the moon and other planets. You need to upgrade the vehicle assembly building, you need to upgrade the launch pad, and if you want to build space planes, you will need to upgrade the runway and the spaceplane hangar as well. Eventually you're going to need to upgrade all the buildings like mission control so you can take more missions, research and development so you can spend more research point because the game starts off giving you a cap so you can spend no more than 100 points per research item at the start, which is great for low tech, but eventually it costs you more than that. So these missions are good. If you can get a whole bunch of them stacked together, do a couple of launches, even be a bit more inventive and cram a whole bunch of modules in one cool looking craft, great. Get as much credits as you can early in the game and it will really set you up well in the future. And here we are now, re-entering the atmosphere at quite a gentle pace, only around 1200 meters a second, which isn't too fast at all. The previous launch I did, I came in a lot hotter than this at around 1900, but there wasn't any heat damage, so I wasn't too stressed. In fact, I probably could have gotten away with the heat shield, but I just like to play it safe with these missions. And we'll speed up the game now to splashdown. And there we go, a soft and safe landing for our 3 Kerbals there. Now let's get back to the Kerbal Space Center and see what that netted us. Excellent, we got some science points as well as some funds, which is good news because it means we're finally going to have enough to get Jebediah into a proper orbit for the first time. So let's hop into research and development now and unlock the next bit of tech that we're going to need for this. Which of course is going to be unlocking that Terrier liquid fuel engine. And the larger fuel tank will help as well. And now we need to upgrade the vehicle assembly building. Not exactly cheap at 225,000 credits, or whatever it is the Kerbals use in this game as their currency. And we will now build our orbital rocket. So with this rocket, not only are we going to be sending up Jebediah, but we're also going to send up some science equipment as well to get some more science points. So I'm going to stick the Science Junior unit in there. I'm also going to stick a service bay as well, so we can safely store away the more delicate scientific equipment, as well as a scientific storage unit, as we could well and truly pass by several different biomes, and I want to get as much science as possible. And these units, as far as I'm aware, don't have a storage limit, so basically for things like temperature sensors and things like that, instead of sending stuff back via communication. You can actually store them in these little containers, and when you recover your ship later on, providing the container has survived, you'll get all of those science points in full. Now, to get into low Kerbal orbit, this vessel is going to need a delta V budget of at least 3,400 meters per second. For those of you who are new to the game, and to rocketry in general, delta V is going to be a term that you will hear a lot more, so I shall explain it now as best as I can. Delta V literally means change in velocity. Imagine your ship is currently sitting in space with no other relative force affecting it, and let's say that it has a delta V of 1,500 meters per second. If you were to ignite your engines and burn, keeping your ship in a dead straight line the whole time, you would finish that burn with a relative velocity of 1,500 meters per second. Now similarly, if you were to only burn for half as long, you'd only wind up with a relative velocity of 750 meters per second. However, you would still have another 750 meters per second of delta V left, which means if you were to turn your ship around and burn in the opposite direction, you would be able to reduce your relative velocity back to zero. That's what delta V is, the capacity for which your ship can change velocity. Which brings me neatly onto delta V budgets. Your delta V budget is an estimate of the total amount of delta V required for you to complete your missions. For this mission, I am assigning myself a delta V budget of around 4,500 meters per second. That gives me 3,400 to get into orbit, another 600 to reduce our orbit so that we fall back to Kerbin, and another spare 500 meters per second of delta V in case of human error. I always think it's a good idea to budget an extra 500 meters a second or so if you're new to the game. That way you greatly reduce the risk of running out of fuel. For larger missions you may want to push that out to over 1,000, but that is a discussion for another day. Now in the stock game, the only way of figuring out your delta V is by literally doing the math. But we're not going to do that for two reasons. Number one, there are other videos on YouTube that will do a much better job of explaining it than I ever can. Number two, embarrassingly, I'm pretty crap at maths. History is my strong suit, not maths. However, there's another way to figure out your delta V anyway, and that's by installing the Kerbal Engineer mod. Kerbal Engineer will provide you with real-time delta V figures whilst you build your vessels, and during the mission, it can also provide you with real-time delta V information and even tell you how long it will take before your delta V is exhausted. This mod makes planning missions and delta V budgets so much easier, and it's not really cheating, is it? I mean, you're allowed to take a calculator into a maths exam, aren't you? Anyway, that's my quick explanation of delta V and what it means. Now let's get our Kerbal into orbit. We're currently waiting for the solid rocket boosters to be exhausted, and then we're going to dump those and carry on just on the liquid engine only. Now the first stage should be enough to at least get us suborbital, and then the third and final stage will be enough to push us into orbit, and then also allow us to deorbit as well afterwards. Now during the ascent you'll probably notice me collecting all of the science data using X Science. Hopefully we're going to have a pretty good amount of science points after this mission is completed to unlock some tech for some future missions that we'll be doing next time. Now I have found that this is usually the most stable build for getting into orbit. There are other builds you can use without having to unlock as much technology, but I tend to find this to be the most user-friendly build, and it allows you to sort of be a bit more careless with your delta V. It can be quite a forgiving build, this one basically. Especially when you learn how to do gravity turns properly, which is what we're doing here. So a gravity turn is basically what you need to use to get into orbit, because if you were to fire your rocket and just go straight up, you'll eventually just come straight down. An orbit in the most crudest sense is having your rocket permanently falling but never hitting the ground. So to do that, not only do you need to achieve a high vertical velocity, you also need to achieve a high horizontal velocity. So you're traveling forward and also falling, but your curve is never hitting the ground. The periapsis of your curve never hits the ground, so you're just permanently going in a big circle around the planet. And here we are, we've cut engines, and we're getting ready to make our orbital insertion burn, which is the burn you use when you get near to apoapsis, and it'll raise your velocity up to orbital speed. Now we still have quite a bit of fuel left in the first stage. I was very generous with the delta V on this one, so we're going to use all of that now to take our speed up, and I dare say we're probably going to actually wind up with quite a bit of delta V left after this stage has been used. Let's see how much. I reckon we'll have at least 3/4 of that Terrier tank left, if not more. And there we go, that's the first stage done. We're depositing that now. That'll just go back and burn up in the atmosphere. Later on we will be looking at reusable staging like we see with SpaceX, but for now we're just doing it the traditional burn and dump method. And this Terrier engine doesn't have a lot of thrust, but it's very efficient with its fuel, and it is an ideal orbital insertion stage engine for these smaller launches. Perfect for probes and things like that as well. There are other smaller engines you unlock later on as well, which are even better for probes, but we'll move on to them at a later episode. And what we're looking for is for our periapsis height to become equal with the apoapsis height. So if you look at the Kerbal engineer readout there, you can see we've still got a way to go. It's still at the negative figures there. We obviously want to get that up into the positive figures, and then up to 76,000. And here we go. So we're about to approach 79,000. There we go, and we are in orbit. And there we go, mission complete, and with well over 1100 meters a second of delta V remaining. So I think I was actually a bit more than a little bit generous with the delta V budget, but better to be safe than sorry when you're first starting out. This will probably have enough delta V actually to do a return and flyby from the Mun if we really wanted to, but we're not going to bother with that today. We're just going to go ahead and start collecting all of our science data and storing it back in our unit here. And then after that we might as well just burn retrograde and re-enter the atmosphere and get Jebediah safely back on terra firma. Now once we've returned and collected all of this science data, we should have quite a fair amount, and hopefully enough to unlock some more items that will allow us to travel further and send some heavier payloads into orbit as well. Okay, so what we'll do now is we'll turn our ship around and get ready to fire retrograde so that we can degrade our orbit and re-enter the atmosphere at a safe trajectory. And here we go, beginning our retrograde burn here. I'm going to try and land the ship in the ocean, preferably, to do a soft splashdown with the parachutes. So we're just going to adjust our descending trajectory here. There is actually a mod that you can download which calculates your trajectory change as you go through the atmosphere. I haven't got that installed yet, but I will more than likely install it for later videos when it's a bit more necessary, when we're fine-tuning our landings. But for now, we don't really need to worry about it. And we'll time warp now to re-entry. And here we are entering the atmosphere, and there's no sense to not use the fuel that we have left in the ship, so what we're going to do now is we're just going to burn retrograde and use the remaining delta V to bleed off as much speed as possible as we re-enter the atmosphere. That'll drop our trajectory further down and almost guarantee an ocean landing, hopefully, and it'll also slow us down, which will make for a safer re-entry in general. At the end of the day, if you've brought the fuel with you, you might as well use it, otherwise it's essentially a waste of funds at this point. You could potentially attempt to do a re-entry taking the tank with you and attempting to recover it, but I'm not going to bother at this time. And with the fuel spent, we're just going to incline the ship, dump the tank, and then go retro again, and we'll continue our descent. And here we are deploying the parachutes and preparing for a safe landing in the sea. And I've pretty much timed that perfectly. And there we go, safe and sound in the ocean, and we might as well just recover our vessel and see what we have got from this mission. And would you look at that, 115 science points. That is a healthy amount of science. We have done much sciencing today, and we shall be spending that science probably wisely. I like to think we're going to try and spend it wisely anyway. And we've also got a large amount of funds as well. We're at 163,000 funds, or whatever it is that the Kerbals use for currency, which will be excellent use in the next episodes, as we're going to be building some much larger rockets and speeding things up a bit now. But before we do that, we're going to need to use our science points and unlock some more technology. But we'll be doing that in the next episode. For now, I'm going to close this one off. Hopefully this has been informative and it gives you a rough idea on how to get into orbit on your own, and hopefully it's served as an appreciable tutorial. If you do have any feedback about the audio quality or the pacing of the video, please feel free to leave a comment and let me know. Until then, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.